Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to hashtag Loveseat for Two. You're here with Michaelia and Andrew Dobbin, author of the
Hi.
book Marriage a Love Seat for Two. So last week we started our discussion on forgiveness, and we talked a little bit about some of the effects of unforgiveness, and we're going to be going a little bit further in this afternoon to look at how we can actually work through the process of forgiveness. If you remember last week, we talked about the fact that forgiveness is not just an emotion, it's a decision that we make. And it can be a difficult decision, but when we think of it in light of this example where unforgiveness is like you drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. When you think of it that way, it makes it easier for you to make a decision to forgive because we don't want to poison our own system. And towards the end of this broadcast, I'll share just a little bit of my testimony, my experience with unforgiveness and forgiveness, and we'll see how today goes. If you're watching the replay, thank you very much for joining in. If you have not yet liked our new Love Seat for Two page, please go ahead and do so. And now I will turn it over to my husband, Andrew.
Yes, wonderful good afternoon, good Friday afternoon to you all.
TGIF
Yes, thank God it's Friday.
Friday.
So today we are going to continue our conversation about forgiveness. Of course, forgiveness is letting go or releasing somebody of a debt. And that indebtedness is a result of some kind of a hurt that they may have caused you, whether it's directly or indirectly. So that's what we want to look at pretty much as a working definition of what forgiveness is. Now, as we talk about forgiveness, we also want to talk about what forgiveness is not. Sometimes people feel like if I forgive, then I am actually letting somebody off the hook. And I am giving up my right to get justice. And while there may be some truth to that, based on what we talked about last week, the merits of forgiveness far outweigh what you lose in the process. So forgiveness is not letting somebody off the hook. If anything, you are letting that person go so that you will not reap the negative effects of unforgiveness. So it's not letting this the situation or just go without any kind of a remedy, but you are releasing the person because that's what you need to do for you to move on. All right. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that forgiveness is not forgetting. Some people, and you may have heard the saying,
Forgive and forget.
forgive and forget. And some people take that to mean, if I truly forgive you, then I forget what you've done. I don't know about you, but in the realm of real people, especially if you've been hurt in a very pronounced way, it is really unreasonable for one to ask somebody to totally forget about what occurred. Now, you're not really supposed to forget. You're not wired that kind of a way. But what we would try to forget or we try to get rid of is the ill feeling that the offense had caused us. We'll have to try to release and let go of that ill feeling that the incident or the offense did cause us, so that we can move on with our life. Now, one of the reasons why forgiveness is so difficult is because forgiveness is not natural. That's another thing I want us to look at. It's not natural for us to not want to get our pound of flesh. It's not natural for me not to strike back when somebody has struck me in a way that hurts me. And so that's why one of the reasons why forgiveness is so difficult and so hard for so many, simply because it's not something that you naturally do or you're naturally inclined to do. Another thing that I need us to remember is that forgiveness is not conditional. Once you decide that you are forgiving somebody or you've forgiven somebody, then you have to recognize that you're not forgiving them based on this or based on that or based on the other. But forgiveness, when you forgive somebody, you're really letting go with no conditions. And this is very, very important as it relates to marriage, because sometimes I often hear folks says, well, Pastor, he said he forgave me, and I thought we were over it, but then something else happened, and he comes and he brings the whole story back up, and vice versa. But forgiveness, when we understand what it is not something that is conditional. It's something that is unconditional with no strings attached. Now, the process of forgiveness, and notice I said process and not event, because it is indeed a process. The process of forgiveness does come with some barriers. There are some barriers, some things that cause us not to want to forgive as we ought to. And one such thing is thinking that when I forgive the offender, that I am enabling an unjust behavior. Please know that that's not the case. You are forgiving not based on what the person does after they committed the act, but you're forgiving considering that it is in your best interest, my best health, and mental health as well, that I let go and forgive the person. So it's not excusing an unjust behavior, is ensuring that that behavior doesn't cause even more damage than what it has caused before. The next barrier that I'd like us to look at, and there are many, but I just choose to highlight a few. This one is really, really big. Many people say, I can't forgive him or I can't forgive her because they have never said they are sorry. This right here is a big one, because just last week I was teaching on the same topic here, and somebody brought up a real story where a person was living their life with unforgiveness, still holding on to somebody that's actually dead and gone. Person is in the grave. That person may have offended them, but they haven't found it within themselves to forgive and to let go of that person who had done them wrong. And the reason why they justify holding on to that is because the person never asked for forgiveness. The other person never said they are sorry. And this has to do many times with how we are brought up. If you remember when we were children, and one child may have done something wrong to another child, we parents, when the parents intervene, they are always saying to the offender, say you're sorry. And after the offender said they are sorry, whether they meant it or not, then the one who is offended is now asked that, will you forgive him or her? And so we are taught from an early age, may not be the intention of our parents to send that particular message, but we are taught that if the person don't say they are sorry, then we reserve the right to not forgive. And so we grow up with that kind of a mindset, and it negatively impacts us as we go forward and cause us to hold on to people and hold on to things longer than we should. In fact, sometimes people offend us and they are unaware.
Right.
So in a case like that, if you decide that you only forgive when somebody say they are sorry, then that you will continue holding on to that person indefinitely because they
They're
do
not
not know,
aware.
they are unaware that they have caused you hurt. So that is why we need to get over this particular barrier of waiting for somebody to always say I'm sorry before we go ahead and forgive. The other one too is another reason why people hold on to unforgiveness is that the guilty party oftentimes have an attitude as if, well, it wasn't that bad. You're making a big deal. You're making drama out of nothing. And so because of their attitude, it sometimes make it difficult for us to really let them go and let it go. But even in a situation like that, you still have to ask yourself the question, is it worth jeopardizing my health? Last week we talked about the stress that comes with unforgiveness and the results of stress. Stress is one of the number one causes of diseases in people's body, sicknesses in people's body. So do I want to carry all of that around simply because of the attitude or the ignorance of somebody else? Because many times that attitude is steeped in ignorance. Sometimes it may be somebody who has been hurt themselves, didn't know how to deal with the issue, never forgave, and so it's almost like they're paying you back. They want you to feel the pain that they felt when they were hurt. Ladies and gentlemen, it really doesn't work for you. It doesn't work in your best interest if you're holding on to the other person simply because their attitude is rotten. All right. And then the final barrier that I want to talk about before we go into steps to forgiveness is this: forgiveness is not fair. Forgiveness is not fair. I can just recall, and I'm sure some of us are probably going back to our childhood days when we are asked to forgive somebody when we really don't want to. We want to see them get a whooping. We want to see them hurt the way we were hurt. We want to see them go through the pain that we go through. And so when you are now asked to let go somebody, let go of your right to be hurt, then you are saying this is not fair. And guess what? You're right. It's not fair. But again, you come up around to the question, do I love myself enough that even though this is unfair, I am going to let it go and let the person go? All right, so I just want you to consider those barriers. I hope we are able to work around them and get to that place of forgiveness. So now we look at the steps to forgiveness. There may be many, but I simply just bring it down to 3 steps. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you,
Hi,
Lisa,
Lisa.
for checking in. All right, others who are looking on, let's know that you're there. Say something so we know that you're there. All right, so the steps to forgiveness, I just want to use the acronym IAC. IAC. I means to identify, A means to admit, and C means to choose. And we'll go into those 3. I means to identify the offense. I must identify what is it that the person did that caused me hurt. I've come to learn that you cannot conquer your giant unless you're able to identify what that giant is. Forgiveness is the same thing. You cannot begin to forgive if you haven't fully identified what the offense is. So I stands for identifying the offense. And then we go to A, which is admit. Admit that you were hurt by what the offender did or did not do. Admit that you were hurt by what the offender did or did not do. One of the things that delay forgiveness is when we deny that we are hurt.
True.
When we deny that the thing actually happened. And then when we begin to make excuses for the offender. We don't want to make excuses for the offender. Sorry about that. We want to really own the fact that we have been hurt by the situation. We want to admit that we've been hurt. And then one other thing that people sometimes do is that they try to take the blame for somebody else's offense.
Yes.
And this often happened in situations where it's an abusive relationship.
Right.
The victim sometimes take the blame for what somebody else did. You must not take the blame or responsibility for somebody else's action. Each man, each woman is ultimately responsible for their own action. And so if you choose to try to own somebody else's action, then it delays the process of forgiveness, because now you're not admitting to your hurt. You're now making excuses for how you feel. So it is important that we identify what the offense is. We admit that we've been hurt by what the offender did or did not do. And then thirdly, we must choose to forgive. IAC. Identify, admit, and choose. Choose to forgive. Remember that forgiveness, though it is not fair, forgiveness is a choice.
Right.
You may not always feel like it. In fact, most times, especially when you're really, really hurt, you will not feel like forgiving. You will not always feel like doing it, but you must choose to do so. We can always think about many instances in our lives where we had decisions to make that we did not necessarily feel good about it, but we recognize that this decision was necessary, even though it may cause us some level of discomfort. We have to choose to forgive. And as we choose to forgive, we also have to be mindful that forgiveness is a process. Not an event, but a process. And so we have to work with the process. You must give yourself time to heal.
Yes.
You must give yourself time to recover. Now, you make the choice to forgive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have made that transition in your emotion immediately. The emotional response is going to take a while. And so we have to be honest with ourselves, and we must also give ourselves time to heal. And I have to speak to the offenders, because all of us will be offenders, and all of us will be the ones who have been offended from time to time. When we find ourselves as the offender, and when we genuinely repent and ask for forgiveness, we have to recognize that the person we are asking for forgiveness from needs some time to process what they've been through, and even process what you have said, and your apology, and so on and so forth. So it is only fair that we give them that opportunity to work that thing out and work through the emotional piece of the forgiveness. And that is why it is a process. And might I say to you, it is such a process that we do not want to rush. If you rush too fast through the process, you may damage the integrity of the product. So you want to make sure you take your time. Now, in taking your time, you're not going to linger unnecessarily on ill feeling, but you're going to take the time to come to grips with what has occurred. And we may even need to pray about it. When hurt happens in a relationship setting, let's say one person has been unfaithful to the other, that kind of a hurt don't just go away, because there's a lot to think about, there's a lot to process. There's a lot to work through, because it's not just hurt, it's betrayal, and a whole slew of other things that are involved in the act of being unfaithful to the spouse. So when somebody comes around to say, I am sorry, you've got to recognize, when you say you're sorry, you've got to recognize that the other person deserves some time to work through, and if they need their space to do it, you give them their space. Hello, if they need their space to process, then that's what they need. You give them what they need, and allow them to work through it. And some of us have this tendency where we want to put timeline
On somebody else.
on somebody else's process. Please know that if it's not your process, you have to give that other person the time to process it in their own time. All right. So I need for us to remember that kind of a thing. And when we find ourselves stuck, when we find ourselves can't let something go or let somebody go, then we have to give it to prayer. We have to give it to God. We can't just say, well, I'm just going to leave it to time. Never do that. Never do that. Never leave something to time and time alone. All time will do is cause that thing to fester. You have to have a plan, and you have to give it to much prayer, give it to the Lord constantly, reading the word, and even talking about it in a constructive kind of a way. You have to do a number of things. Time alone will not heal your wound. Time may cause it to fester. And if a wound is exposed to time without treatment, you may get in limb because you just left it to time. So I need for us to recognize that people will need time to process, amen, forgiveness, but they will also need to recognize that time alone won't do it. You'll have to read. You'll have to pray. Some of us may have to fast. Some of us may have to get somebody to partner with us in prayer. Some of us may need counseling to get through it. So we must recognize that forgiveness is a process, and it's a process that should never be rushed. All right. And then the final thing I want to say here, which may be controversial, is that forgiveness is not reconciliation. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. It takes one person to forgive. It takes at least two persons to have a reconciliation. Oftentimes people think that, well, if you forgive me, then a part of the forgiveness is being reconciled with me.
And things go back to the way they were.
Yes, not necessarily. Not necessarily. In a marriage situation, you would hope that forgiveness would lead to reconciliation.
Yes.
But there has to be certain things within your environment, within that particular situation, that have to be addressed in order for reconciliation to be real. Let's say, for example, a husband is in the habit of beating his wife. And he goes to church and he hears a message and he's convicted about the message, and he comes home and he says to his wife, please forgive me. Please forgive me. And, we are going to be better going forward. But then he goes again and do the same thing another time, and this time it's more severe, and this time she now has a physical injury. But then he comes back again and say the same thing. Let's be reconciled. In that situation, that's an unhealthy situation, because the cause effect is not being addressed, and therefore you will have a repeat of whatever the abuse has been. So there are some situations where forgiveness may be necessary. Actually, forgiveness is always necessary, but reconciliation may not be in the best interest of the person who may have been hurt. And so we will have to deal with every situation on its own merit. We'll have to deal with every relationship on its own merit, and therefore make a decision whether or not reconciliation is in the best interest of the hurt party, or even in the best interest of both. There are some people that, and hear this from a pastor, there are some people that you have a better relationship with them from a distance.
True.
You have a better relationship with them from a distance than for them to be in your space and be in your face all the time. And so there comes a time when something happens, and that something may be the opportunity for you to forgive, but for you to go your separate ways. All right. And failure to go your separate ways, or feeling that you're obligated to be reconciled as evidence that you have forgiven the other person, really will just set you up for the repeat of whatever it is that took place. So I know I have been long with this talk today, and my wife does have a little story to close this thing out with. But I am so grateful that Lisa and the others who have stopped by, we are so grateful that you have. And we just encourage you to walk and live in forgiveness. Babe, what you got to say?
Well, I just wanted to share quickly just something that I had to go through as far as, learning to forgive and, not holding on to unforgiveness. I had some amount of trauma in earlier in life, and for a long time I didn't forgive, and I started to have physical challenges, health challenges as a result of holding on to that whole situation, that whole issue that happened earlier in my life. And I remember going to an altar where I was going to the altar for healing of a physical issue. And the person praying with me started to talk to me about forgiveness. And, by this time I was now saved. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, I thought I forgave that person. But, since I was being asked and I was being spoken to about unforgiveness, I decided, what, let me make a decision to really forgive again, to really let it go, to really call the thing that happened, call the name of the person in my prayer to God and release that person. I was never given an apology, so I couldn't, that wasn't there. The attitude of the individual was still, not good. So I couldn't wait on those things to turn for me to decide to forgive. I had to decide to forgive for myself and for my own health. And the minute I forgave and sincerely forgave, my health issue cleared at that instant, at that altar. My health issue cleared. And so forgiveness is so important. It's the beginning of healing on so many different levels. So it is important. It's imperative that we recognize, yes, the points that my husband raised. Recognize, yes, that I have been hurt. Don't just dismiss it, because I think I did that for a number of years. Just dismiss it. No, that didn't, it's, whatever. Just dismiss it. I had to come to terms with the fact that this happened, that I'm hurt over it, and I had to forgive myself for holding on to it for that long, and forgive myself for taking responsibility for someone else's actions as well. So forgiveness is such a key to moving on with the rest of our lives. So I just wanted to encourage us, if there's anything that has happened in our past, anything that may be happening now, even if the perpetrator is not acting the way that they're supposed to act, it's important for us to do what we need to do to preserve our health and our sanity. And forgiveness is one of those things.
All right. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to ask you, those of you who will be watching the rebroadcast, to like and share and give us your comments. We thank all those who have tuned in thus far. And please know that we are here for you. If you have something that you think we can help you with, we, of course, are marriage and relationship coaches. So anything in that regard is specific to marriage and those who are looking to get married. Please, you can inbox us, contact us somehow, and we will be there for you. If your church could use marriage enrichment a ministry, whether it's a seminar, workshop, whether it's a few hours or 3 or 4 days, we've done those. You can contact us, and we will be glad to come in and share what I believe God has given us as a ministry for the entire world.
Yes.
All right, so please do what you must. You can go to the website
www.loveseat2.com.
Yes, and please get our book if you haven't gotten it yet. Marriage, a Love Seat for Two. It's right there on the website. Those of you who want your Kindle version, you can get it on Amazon as well. But please stay safe this weekend, and may God be with you. And remember, forgiveness is the key. We live to forgive. God bless you.
God bless you.